America has been hostile toward Iran for a very, very long time, since the 1979 revolution, and it barely budged even during the Obama years when we had the nuclear agreement, the JCPOA. That was a modest step in the right direction, but even that agreement, right after its implementation, Obama imposed new sanctions on Iran, on individuals, on entities, breaching the agreement that he agreed to. And negotiations on that went on for years before it was finally consummated. And now we have the Trump administration, and National Security Advisor Michael Flynn put Iran on notice, whatever he means by that, very hostile comment, calling Iran the world's greatest state sponsor of terrorism. Well, there's no question who the world's great sponsor is. America, NATO, and Israel hold that dubious distinction. No other nations rise to the level of the horrors that they commit. Iran supports peace, not war, mutual cooperation with all nations, and to call Iran a great sponsor of terrorism is absolutely outrageous. Of course, what's meant by this is that Iran is helping a beleaguered country, a valued ally, Syria, because America is waging aggressive war against the country, using terrorist foot soldiers. We're still waiting to see how Trump will address this. Will he combat terrorism the way he said he would, allied with Russia? It's early in his administration. He's only been in office 2 weeks and 1 day. This will be the 16th day in office. So it's way too early to judge him on everything going on, although he's certainly done a lot in a very short time. Making a tour of Asia, South Korea, and Japan, America's new defense secretary, James Mattis, four-star general, first general to be a U.S. defense secretary since George Marshall. During the Truman administration in the 1940s, Marshall holding that position for a short time. No other general or admiral held this position because America has a long-standing policy of separating the Defense Department from the military, but you'd never know it. I guess it really doesn't make any difference. You could put a civilian or a general in charge. The policy is still the same. It doesn't matter. They could have anybody in charge, and the policy would be the same. But Mattis made the same comments as Michael Flynn, calling Iran the world's greatest state sponsor of terrorism. This is outrageous stuff. I mean, it's very, very concerning because at some point maybe there could be belligerence instigated against Iran. This would be absolute madness. Russia and China and Iran are close allies. Trump says he wants better relations with Russia, but what sense does it make if he's acting hostile to China and hostile to Iran? That would make better relations with Russia impossible, and having the same deplorable situation existing as it did under Obama, under Bush Cheney, and under the Clintons. So nothing has really changed so far. Again, it's early in Trump's administration, so we have to see the way he goes. He gives a lot of latitude to his ministers. He said that. So whether he will go against some of the things that they're saying or not remains to be seen. But the comments coming out, I mean, the National Security Advisor and Defense Secretary are two very, very high-level positions in his administration. They're extremely hostile to Iran, very, very unnerving, very worrisome. And maybe this indicates exactly how Trump feels, which is a terrible outrage. And a good part of this is because of Trump's one-sided support for Israel. It's vital to mention that. Supporting Israel at the expense of other nations in the region, especially Iran and especially the Palestinians. Again, this is deplorable, and we have to hope that none of this will lead to belligerence, because that would be absolute madness.
Well, that's President Trump, of course, during the campaign last fall, threatening to retaliate against Iran for those small skiffs that harass our warships in the Persian Gulf. You know, the Obama administration policy was to fire warning shots or use verbal warnings with a loudspeaker when those little boats got too close to our naval vessels. But now with Iran testing ballistic missiles this past week, and the administration reacting by putting Iran, quote, on notice, saying it is, quote, playing with fire. But despite that, Tehran remains defiant this Sunday, showing no signs of backing down as it continues its missile and military drills. In fact, one top Iranian general was quoted as saying this: If we see smallest misstep from our enemies, our roaring missiles will fall on their heads. The defense capability and the offensive prowess of Iran's armed forces would make America or any other enemy regretful of any incursion. With us now is John Bolton, former ambassador to the United Nations, senior fellow at the American Enterprise Institute, a Fox's contributor, who's also chairman of the Gatestone Institute here in New York. You know, Ambassador, it seems that perhaps a confrontation with Iran seems almost inevitable. Can the Trump administration, do you think, contain Tehran?
Well, I think they've taken some very important early steps to demonstrate that they are not wildly attached to the Iran nuclear deal. I think much more needs to be done, but I think Iran has figured out that actually elections in America do make a difference, even if they don't in Iran, and that there's a new president with a very different view of that agreement. So I think what we've seen in the wake of the sanctions announced by the White House on Friday was that Iran continued its provocative behavior. I think we can look for more of that in the days to come, because I believe they may be prepared to make some kind of test of strength with the new administration. Not necessarily military, not that they want to provoke conflict, but they may want to see how far they can push. They want to see how much of this is mouth and how much of it is real. So I think we are in a dangerous period here, and I think it calls for making sure we've got a strategy. I think Iran is never going to live up to the nuclear deal. I think we should abrogate it immediately and have serious conversations about what to do next. But make no mistake, I think this is going to be a very interesting couple of weeks.
When you talk about a test, what specifically do you mean? What specifically do you think they will do?
Well, they've got capabilities, obviously, in the what they call the Persian Gulf, what Saudi Arabia and others call the Arabian Gulf, where there are U.S. military units. They've got the Houthi rebels in Yemen that just as recently as last week fired an Iranian missile at a Saudi ship. Some think they thought it was an American frigate out there in the Red Sea. They can unleash Hezbollah, Hamas, and other terrorists. They are, as we've discussed before, the central bankers of international terrorism. So they've got a lot of buttons they could push. And I think because the Trump administration obviously is just over 2 weeks old, the Ayatollahs may see this as a relatively cost-free opportunity for them to push the envelope.
Well, they're doing that now with the ballistic missile tests. And you know, almost unbelievably, it seems to be allowed under the Iranian nuclear deal. Before the resolution at the Security Council, before the deal, banned ballistic missile tests. But let me read you something from the actual, resolution. Paragraph 3 of Annex B of Resolution 2231, 2015, calls upon Iran not to undertake any activity related to ballistic missiles designed to be capable of delivering nuclear weapons, including launches using such ballistic missile technology. I mean, can you describe what calls upon means? I mean, is that like, pretty please don't do it? I mean, they're allowed. It's unbelievable, Ambassador. They are allowed under the deal because the Security Council changed that when the deal went through to conduct these type of tests.
Yeah. Well, coincidentally, I have an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal that will be in print tomorrow morning that deals with this very subject, because your analysis of that provision is exactly right. When the security wants to say decides or demands, it knows how to do it, and instead it simply called upon Iraq. This is sort of like Iran, sort of like calling upon your children to clean up their room. Imagine what happens then. But there's also a kicker in the clause that you read, because it talks about missiles designed to carry nuclear warheads. And we know from the Vienna deal and from Resolution 2231 that the United States and everybody else welcomed Iran's reaffirmation that it has no intention of acquiring nuclear weapons. So really, what could go wrong here? They don't have a nuclear weapons program, so obviously their missiles can't be designed to carry nuclear weapons. Therefore, the tests are legitimate. This is a case study of just how badly the Vienna deal was negotiated by Barack Obama and John Kerry. So that's why those who say what we should try and do is strictly enforce the nuclear deal have it wrong. It's like trying to nail Jell-O to a wall. You just can't do it.
And finally, you also have made a point. The Security Council resolutions require Iran, they give them a mileage, which is like 19 miles under the border of Israel. So in other words, they're allowed to have these ballistic missiles that can potentially hit Israel. And at the Gatestone luncheon I was at with you this past week, you made a terrific point. You talked about re-entry. Why is that so significant when their first missile they fired last week exploded on re-entry?
Yeah, well, the Pentagon has pointed out that's where the test went wrong. But, you know, the Iranians claim, as do the North Koreans, by the way, who work very closely with Iran, they all claim that their ballistic missile programs are to launch weather and communication satellites. Well, obviously, you don't need to worry about re-entry if you're trying to launch satellites. The point is to put the satellites in space and keep them there. You need to worry about re-entry when you're trying to deliver nuclear warheads to their target. Obviously, they have to get back through the Earth's atmosphere to be detonated above the target. So the fact that Iran is testing re-entry demonstrates exactly what these missiles are for.
You don't have to be Inspector Clouseau to see the clues on re-entry. Ambassador John Bolton, of course, always good to see you. We look forward to your op-ed in the Wall Street Journal tomorrow.
Thank you, Eric.